Professor of Curriculum Foundations and Reading at Georgia Southern University. Thank you for speaking to us today, Michael.
Thanks for asking.
So you've served in a variety of roles at the university level as moderator of the Faculty Senate, faculty advocate, Student Government Association at Georgia Southern University, and committee chair of the Faculty Grievance Committee. Tell me about your experiences, which I assume required advocacy on your part on behalf of your colleagues.
Administrators often feel that they know the inside story, they have the inside scoop on things that are going on, and that policies, written policies and procedures sometimes really don't have to be followed because they feel that there is a greater good that they really know about. And a lot of my advocacy, especially with work with faculty governance and on the grievance committee, has been exactly that, looking at the policies and procedures, making sure they're clear, making sure they protect faculty and students, and then making sure that they're enforceable and followed. Most of the conflicts that I've had at the university level have been because we either didn't have really good policies and procedures that were clear, and in that case then it was incumbent to decide how to get those rewritten so that they were clear, or that they weren't being followed. So I think we've been working hard in those directions. And then also for the business model at universities, faculty governance is not the issue that it was even 20 years ago, 10 or 20 years ago. Faculty are more like technicians, trainers oftentimes, than faculty. And although most faculty handbooks indicate that faculty have an obligation to discuss curricula, to discuss the academic life of the university, a lot of times that they're kept from doing it.
Okay. So what kind of issues did you focus on in particular? Was there any major issues that you focused on?
Well, there are a couple that I felt particularly happy with. When I was moderator of the Faculty Senate, there were only 2 colleges that had faculty governance systems in place. And we appointed some good thinkers to form a committee to look at how to go about getting faculty governance in operating in all the colleges. And what we ended up doing is, in most of the colleges, deans made decisions, and they were followed all the way down, and faculty really didn't have a say so. The dean wanted a committee appointed, it appointed a committee, or she appointed a committee. What we ended up doing was establishing a faculty executive committee in every college, and they served as the liaison between faculty and the administration. And if the dean really wanted to impose anything in terms of policies, procedures, new ideas that occurred to him or her, first had to go through the faculty executive committee. And this was a way the faculty had for vetting and really looking at these policies and procedures, and giving faculty a chance to talk about it, because these executive committees were mostly tenured faculty, people that had institutional memory. Most administrators only stay about 5 or 6 years to begin with, and then they're off. But everyone that comes in has a new idea as to how this place should run. So I was pretty pleased that every college now has a faculty executive committee, and that committee is very vigilant in terms of the oversight on all academic matters.
That's great. Now, you've written a number of articles or letters or op-eds on a variety of education and political issues, which is another form of advocacy. And have they affected your role as a professor in any way?
It does. It's very ironic, because part of my job as a faculty member is to publish research. So I publish a research, and I publish it, oftentimes in NCTE venues, and the readership is extremely limited. But I do an op-ed, a column on a monthly basis for the Savannah Morning News, and that's read all over the place. In fact, it's been picked up in a number of times. I've seen my pieces appear in Valerie Strauss's Washington Post blog, and Maureen Downey's AJC blog, and then I would be inundated with tons and tons of emails and contacts and things about what it was I had written about, which means that there's a readership out there that's hungry for hearing what educators have to say, and that we have had a really hard time tapping into it. Um, I tried to write editorials, I think, that are of interest to Georgians first, but nationally as well, on issues that face teachers. So it's very, very, very teacher-centered writing, that column that I do.
Would you encourage your colleagues to do the same throughout the country?
I have. I actually started to talk to Peter Smagorinsky into doing his column that he does in the AJC, and another colleague at Penn State. She is now writing regularly in Pennsylvania, and so I have tried to talk to people about doing it, because I don't think parents and people who live in a community, people that vote on issues of education, really hear what we have to say. They're certainly not going to wade through our research, to find it. And it's incumbent on us to make what we've learned understandable, to get it out there.
Do you teach your students to do the same, to write letters or to write op-eds?
Absolutely. I have them generally read several different education blogs. I encourage them to post on the blogs, and then I also encourage them during our legislative sessions to contact their legislators, especially when their issues involve testing and Common Core and those kinds of things, and express their points of view. And I tell them that you may be surprised that if enough people really write in, some of these legislators become convinced, well, if they care enough to write, they probably care enough to vote. If they care enough to vote, I better be careful. So sometimes I said, it's a very positive thing.
Well, that's true. You've also been invited to speak about educational issues impacting Georgia, which is a great form of educating others. So tell me about those experiences.
Well, I was on a panel last month with our representative to Congress, David Perdue, talking about the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, in which he is on that committee for the House, and its likelihood of them coming to some kind of agreement with the Senate, which they have actually in the last couple of weeks. Whether or not the president will approve the new rewritten ESEA remains to be seen. His opinion was probably not. My opinion is probably not. It's interesting that we probably, and I told him this, I said, we probably would agree on nothing else. I said, but we do agree on stripping the amount of testing out of the SEA. And I said, we're the House and Senate are both in agreement on that. And I said, we're probably on agreement on letting not just individual states, but letting individual school districts back into making policy decisions that affect their schools and involving parents and those ones. So in terms of that, we were in agreement. He regularly emails me now, and because I told him, I said, look, I do research in this area. If you want to know what the research says, let me know, and I'll tell you what it says. I'm not going to advocate one way or the other. I'm just going to say, here it is. This is good research, or here it is. There's not much research, and this doesn't look that good, but you can take it or leave it. So.
Now, have you established a relationship with your two senators?
Yes.
This is your Congress.
Right. I have, and write to them pretty regularly. It's interesting because they read the Savannah Morning News, or their aides do, so they know what I write about.
Have you offered them the same thing?
I have,
research
and I have to say that of the three, one was just voted in this past year, very conservative. Both of them were very conservative, but all three senators, when I wrote to them, did write me back on the issue, and they may not have written it, or they may have, but I've always felt that they were giving me a particular answer. A couple years ago, Georgia Southern decided to have as a graduation speaker this representative, the Speaker of the House in Georgia. He was probably out in front of every teacher bashing piece of legislation to go through Georgia that there was. And he was going to be the speaker at our graduate ceremony. And so I sent an email to our provost and to the our vice president for the College of Graduate Studies and said, you know that the biggest graduate group are educators. We're going to graduate 80% of the people that are going to be there at this graduate ceremony are educators. And you have just asked the biggest teacher bashing legislator to come speak to them. I said, what are you thinking about? Well, within about an hour, I had 3 vice presidents in my office, scared to death I was going to write about this in the Savannah Morning News, which I wasn't going to, and I didn't. I was just trying to make a point about why don't you let anyone else think about choosing a speaker, especially since we're the ones that are teaching the students. We know, what they're interested in, what they're doing, and second, you're only here because you're afraid rather than dealing with the issue. And that issue is, don't you vet these people first? I said, all I have to do is just mention some of the pieces of legislation that he sponsored. And I said, I'll get a rise out of half the people in there. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. They decided to form a committee. The committee's job is to select graduation speakers. We are encouraged to send in nominations, and we have moved away from politicians, at least in that graduation. We had a Nobel laureate from physics speak once, and we've had somebody from Nassau. So we've given it a lot more academic focus. So that worked.
Well, that's good. You are NCTE's P12 Georgia policy analyst, and sometimes I feel you kind of push the envelope in your reports, but I let it go because I love your writing. How do you feel about the policy analyst role? What would you like to see different?
I like it, and I oftentimes will come across Georgia budget policy stuff. I'm on their mailing list and a whole bunch of other mailing lists, and I see stuff and I think, oh, this would be good to put out there, and it just moves ahead so fast that it seems that almost a day later it's not relevant or as relevant. So and I want to do a better job in getting more pieces in the forefront in terms of what Georgia teachers can look at, especially because we're not on a full year legislative session. We're on only what is it, a 3-month legislative session, 90-day legislative session, and a lot of stuff happens at one time. And so I really feel that I understand my role, and so when you say I push a little bit, sometimes I don't need to. Sometimes it just pushes itself, with some of the wrong-mindedness, that they want to do. They all read the ALEC agenda, and when they read the ALEC agenda, the next thing they do is they start crafting legislation. And it's so obvious what they're trying to do: voucher systems, charter schools, privatization, all these sorts of things. I think anyone that has concern about public education can see these things and almost feel the spin, that's on them without me having to say it. So, in that sense, yeah.
That's true. You're also director of the Georgia Council of Teachers of English, which is an NCTE affiliate. And do you feel like this gives you more room and freedom to advocate?
I've done a lot with that group from both the executive committee and I've been their keynote speaker a couple of times. I've been a member and speaking at it for the last 30 years, but I've kind of got myself into the role now of being a policy person. So each year when we meet in February, I propose a policy talk, and it's always really well attended because people know what to expect. So it's usually I'm giving them a heads up kind of talk. Here's what to expect. We need some advocacy on your part. You need to weigh in on some of these issues yourself, and I think that's helped because I have a lot of teachers who keep in touch and email me and say, here's what I just sent. Johnny Isaacson, our senator, one of our senators. Here's what I just sent. David Perdue. Here's what I just sent. I'm glad to do that. I just sent in my proposal for this year, so it's again it's kind of expected. If I don't do it, I would Why not? We expect this to come. So
If you were to advise your fellow faculty on advocacy at the university, community, state, or national level, what would you tell them or encourage them to do like you're doing?
I tell them to read their faculty handbooks very carefully. And your job as faculty, our job as faculty, is to protect what we do and to protect our students, to make it the most open and honest exchange of ideas and education that we possibly can make it. And our institutions are so afraid of being politically incorrect, and they should. Our president, by our president of our university, by being such very clear in terms of where he stands politically, very conservative, has had buildings built on our campus because he knows that the governor approves those things. So he's in good graces with the governor. So they know what's at stake, but at the same time, some of the things that they're asking faculty and students, to do or to go along with, really aren't in the best interest of education. They don't exercise like the opportunity for faculty to decide their courses and what's in them and how it should be presented, because the interchange of ideas really separates us out from everywhere else. The fact that you can walk into one history course and get a point of view about a certain era in history, and go next door where the teacher's using the same book, covering the same subject, and get a totally different view of the same era of history. But that's what's exciting about being in a university. That's what's exciting about these kinds of the kind of discussions that ensue from them. So I constantly urge it. You have to be vigilant in terms of protecting, what we do as faculty.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you talking to us today.
Well, thanks. I thought about the questions,